For better or worse, I chose better. I moved to New York in 1985 from Minnesota because I was seeking a better life. I remember meeting who I thought was going to be the love of my life forever. And I remember when I joined this church group through the church in Long Island, and I met you, and I thought, oh my God, I see something. I see potential. And I remember when you took me out to a diner and we were talking for hours. And being that I was 25 years of age, I said, oh my God, now I want to get married. Now I found who I thought was going to be the love of my life. I found him. I found you. So I packed up my bags from Long Island and I moved into your 38-foot Carver Mariner boat. And I remember we lived together for 1 year. And I remember working in your business, in your advertising, direct mail business, making six-figure income. And I remember we were talking about getting married. And I said yes. You proposed to me, and I said yes. We moved to Rhinebeck, New York, and we got married at the Justice of the Peace, and some family members were not happy about that, but despite that, I went through with it. And I remember being married in the Justice of the Peace, and the judge said, for better, for worse, till death do us part. And I said yes, and I remember that we both said yes. And then we had a reception afterwards at an Italian restaurant. And I remember my parents flying in. I remember everyone, flew in from all over to celebrate our wedding. But then something happened. As we were working together and we were commuting back and forth from Rhinebeck, New York to New York City, something happened. And I was ashamed to share it with family members at the time. I remember when you decided to uncover your mask and the verbal abuse started, accusing me of things that I never did. And the verbal abuse became so bad that in December of 1999, I was lying down in bed and you were complaining, you were doing all kinds of things and really, really humiliating me and putting me down. And I said to you, I am going to walk into the other room and I am going to try and go to sleep and forget about this. But lo and behold, I did not make it into the other room. I remember when you grabbed me from behind, grabbed my neck, threw me against the wall, and I fell backwards. Fortunately, I landed backwards on the carpet, but I was bleeding. My nose broke. I could feel the crackling sounds as my face was hitting the wall. I fell backwards and I was lying there. I was bleeding. I was all messed up. I was black and blue. And you walked away from me and I was crying. And then a few minutes later, you decided to take me to the hospital to cover it up because we lived in a 2-story house and I was upstairs. So 3 days later, I had reconstructive nose surgery. I remember the surgeon coming out in the emergency room and he said, you were going to need nose surgery. And that was like, oh my goodness. My life changed. It was just like, I felt worthless. I felt so bad. But then all of a sudden you decided to be good to me and take me to the hospital. I received prayer and I made it through my reconstructive nose surgery. Yet I was still in pain and I had to endure that pain. And then I remember things were good for a while, brought me home, and things were good for a while, but then the abuse started again a month later. And this is the time when I decided to go out to work in corporate America to make a name for myself and to find my identity because I felt that I lost my identity and I needed to reclaim my power. So I was working for several companies, made a name for myself, but you didn't appreciate that. You did not appreciate that. all I could see was jealousy and resentment and more arrogance. And then after that, more verbal abuse. And it became so bad that one night I called the police because you were ready to spit on me and you were throwing things around. And I'm saying to myself, do I need to stay in this marriage? And I remember when the police came, I left that night. They even put my suitcase in the car for me. And I drove to a hotel to stay for 2 nights. And I remember talking to the priest, and the priest said, you don't need to suffer like this anymore. Doesn't matter whether I married for better or for worse. He said, it doesn't matter. He said, you don't need to be suffering. And I remember the priest telling me, you don't need to suffer in silence anymore. And that's when, and I was scared. I didn't want to file for divorce. I remember still being scared because I thought you were going to change and I thought that things would be okay. But guess what? Things did not change. In fact, things got worse. So I picked myself back up and I drove to a lawyer's office in Poughkeepsie, New York, and I filed for divorce. And that was in May of 2010. And I remember you were blaming me for financial stuff, and you were blaming me for so many things that I just drew a line in the sand. And you withheld monies from me. You prevented me from seeing some of my family members, including my parents. And I remember when you wrote those horrible letters to the New York State Police and the Dutchess County Sheriff's Office admonishing me. But guess what? No more silence. Today, I feel empowered, and today I feel so happy and grateful that I powered through my divorce and I found my identity. Thanks to you, you have molded me into who I truly am today. And I made a decision to not suffer in silence anymore and share my story of how I went from a breakdown to a breakthrough from domestic violence. And thank you for the lessons, huge lesson. And I give myself credit for stepping into victory. And I stepped into victory and I didn't need you anymore. And now I am empowering other women to do the same, to break the silence, to make their voices heard. So thank you for this. I chose better. I decided not to suffer in silence anymore, and I chose better. Thank you for the lessons.